Have you ever stopped to consider that perhaps some of the feelings you carry every day aren't really yours? Anxiety that arises out of nowhere, thoughts that repeat themselves without explanation, a heaviness in your heart that insists on remaining even when everything seems fine. What if some of this were the result of something much greater than simply emotional or psychological issues? What if Emmanuel, the spirit who guided Chico Xavier in so many profound messages, had already explained exactly how this happens and how to recognize these signs? Because what you're about to discover now may surprise you, perhaps even change the way you view your own life. Emmanuel is known as one of the most lucid and respected spirits who worked alongside Chico Xavier. His messages always carried not only spiritual wisdom, but also a practical insight into the human condition. He spoke of spiritual obsession not as a distant concept reserved for books or the past, but as a present reality capable of affecting us all to varying degrees. And that is precisely what we will discuss: the 3 types of spiritual obsession that Emmanuel described, which still manifest themselves silently in the lives of many people today. Perhaps you've felt that certain thoughts just won't leave your mind, even when you try to push them away. Perhaps you've experienced moments when your emotions didn't seem like your own, as if someone were whispering ideas and feelings directly into your consciousness. Or perhaps you've lived with someone who seemed dominated by forces that went beyond simple human behavior. Have you ever experienced this? So, know that you're not alone. Emmanuel warned us precisely to understand these situations and showed us that spiritual obsession can have different levels and manifest in different ways. From the most subtle to the most intense, it's important to understand that Emmanuel didn't speak of these influences with the intention of spreading fear or superstition. On the contrary, his words were always an invitation to spiritual awakening, to taking responsibility for one's thoughts, and to constant vigilance. He explained that spiritual obsession is a natural reality within human life, and that recognizing these processes is the first step to transforming them. By offering this reflection, Emmanuel invites us to realize that our minds and hearts are not isolated, but in constant harmony with the energies, spirits and thoughts that circulate around us. Stay with me until the end, because throughout this video, you'll understand how these 3 types of obsession manifest themselves in our daily lives and why Emmanuel considered it so essential to raise awareness about them. After all, recognizing these influences can help us not only avoid unnecessary suffering, but also strengthen our spirit in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Imagine how many situations could be understood differently if we were aware of what's really happening on the invisible plane. We often believe our problems are limited to the material world, but the truth is that spirituality reveals deeper layers of existence. Emmanuel showed us that there is a direct link between our emotional states and the spiritual attunement we cultivate. This means that every thought, every emotion, and every choice opens doors that can bring us closer to enlightened spirits, or make us vulnerable to negative influences. And it is precisely this invisible dynamic that explains why some people feel trapped in cycles of sadness, fear, or resentment. What you'll hear here isn't just spiritual theory. These are teachings that have spanned decades and continue to resonate powerfully because they speak to something we all experience to a greater or lesser extent. Emmanuel described the 3 types of spiritual obsession as stages that can intensify if we're not careful, and the clarity with which he expounded this theme is impressive. Therefore, it's crucial to delve into these teachings now, so they can illuminate areas of your life that you may never have connected to the spiritual world. And it is precisely from this initial understanding we will begin to unravel together the first type of spiritual obsession, the one that seems almost invisible, that can be much more present in your daily life than you imagine. Have you ever wondered why? At certain points in your life, negative thoughts just won't go away. That idea that insists on returning, that feeling of sadness or fear that appears for no apparent reason, as if coming from a place you can't identify. What if I told you that Emmanuel, the spirit guide who accompanied Chico Xavier in so many messages, explained exactly how these influences can arise almost invisibly, silently, yet powerfully enough to alter our feelings and even our choices? What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because we're talking about the first type of spiritual obsession, the one that infiltrates the small crevices of our minds and hearts. Subtle obsession doesn't arrive with noise or obvious signs. Rather, it manifests as a recurring thought, an emotion with no logical explanation, a restlessness that begins small but insists on remaining. Emmanuel warned us that this form of obsession is one of the most dangerous precisely because it goes unnoticed. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever found yourself immersed in unfounded worries, trapped in ideas of failure, discouragement, or guilt that seem to spring from nowhere? It is in these moments that we often open the door to external spiritual influences that connect to our emotional weaknesses. The Spirit Emmanuel said that the human mind is like a radio station. It's constantly emitting and receiving thought waves. When our feelings are out of balance, when we harbor anger, sadness, or resentment, we create gaps that facilitate attunement with spirits vibrating in the same energy ranges. This connection doesn't need to be explicit to have an impact. It can begin with a simple sigh of discouragement, which soon transforms into a repetitive thought and then into a difficult-to-control emotion. And it is thus almost imperceptibly that subtle spiritual obsession takes hold. Imagine someone who constantly feeds fear. Little by little, this fear attracts spiritual influences that further reinforce this feeling, creating a vicious cycle. Emmanuel reminds us that spiritual obsession is not just a matter of faith, but also of mental attunement. The energy we hold in our mind acts as an invitation, and spirits that are attuned to this frequency naturally approach. This is why so many people carry emotional burdens that seem greater than their own strength. Stay with me until the end, because understanding how this process works is the first step to breaking this cycle. It's not about imagining spiritual persecution everywhere, but rather recognizing that often what we feel isn't just a result of our inner world. There's a constant interaction between us and the spiritual realm. And Emmanuel brought these guidelines precisely so we can learn to identify the subtle manipulations that can occur in our daily lives. Perhaps you've experienced something similar? Waking up with no desire to get up, feeling like nothing makes sense, or being overcome by sudden irritation for no clear reason. Situations like these may be just fleeting emotions. It's true, but they can also indicate the presence of this discrete obsession, which Emmanuel described as the most common and at the same time the most difficult to detect. Suspects that their own thoughts aren't completely their own. That's the big question. When discussing this topic, Emmanuel wasn't seeking to spread fear, but rather to offer an invitation to vigilance and spiritual strengthening. It reminds us that every time we cultivate good thoughts, connect with prayer, or work for the good, we are closing these gaps and shifting our mind's tuning. This is the key to understanding subtle obsession, realizing that it isn't destiny, but a consequence of the frequency we choose to remain on, and it is precisely by understanding this first level, seemingly simple but profoundly present in the lives of so many people, that we pave the way to understanding the other types of spiritual obsession that Emmanuel revealed. Because if this more discrete form already has the power to affect our feelings and thoughts, imagine what can happen when the influence becomes more intense. Have you ever felt like you suddenly started acting in a way you didn't recognize in yourself, as if strange thoughts invaded your mind, or intense emotions arose without any logical explanation? What if Emmanuel, the spirit guide who brought profound teachings through Chico Xavier, had explained that this could be a sign of a more intense, obsessive process, capable of directly influencing our attitudes and even guiding our destiny? What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because we're entering a deeper territory, where spiritual obsession ceases to be just a subtle influence on thoughts and begins to gain real ground in the behavior and choices of those who experience it. Emmanuel showed us that after the first subtle level, there is a second type of spiritual obsession, more direct and penetrating. Here, the person not only thinks differently, but begins to feel and act in ways that don't seem like their own. It's as if an invisible weight is pushing them in a certain direction, generating disproportionate reactions, sudden mood swings, and even attitudes that contradict their very essence. Have you ever experienced this? Have you observed someone close to you who seemed not themselves at certain moments? as if another will were guiding their actions. This is the point at which spiritual obsession ceases to be discrete and begins to manifest itself palpably in practical life. According to Emmanuel, at this stage, the obsessive spirit gains a greater foothold in the person's mind, directly influencing their feelings and desires. It's not just a repetitive idea, but an active interference, a kind of constant suggestion that shapes reactions and behaviors. Imagine, for example, someone who has always been calm and balanced, but who suddenly begins to have outbursts of anger for no apparent reason, or someone who once lived in peace, but begins to feel an almost uncontrollable urge towards self-destructive behavior. It's as if there were an outside force guiding this person's steps, and they themselves can't explain why. But Emmanuel didn't stop there. He explained that there is a third type of spiritual obsession, the most serious of all, near complete domination. At this level, it's no longer just an external influence or an invisible nudge. What's happening is a true, unhealthy partnership between the incarnate and the discarnate. It's a profound connection in which the obsessing spirit begins to act as if it were owner of the person's mind and body. It's as if someone were driving the car of your life alongside you, and little by little, taking your hands off the wheel to assume complete control. This process, described by Emmanuel, should not be viewed as a legend or something fanciful, but as a serious spiritual reality that can affect anyone who remains vulnerable to negative vibrations for a prolonged period. And perhaps that's why, throughout history, we find so many accounts of individuals who seem to lose their identity, as if driven by invisible forces determining their paths. Emmanuel invites us to view this phenomenon without fear, but with clarity and responsibility, understanding that spiritual mastery doesn't happen overnight. It is built on small concessions, on repeated thoughts, on nurtured emotions. Until such a strong connection is established that the obsessor finds space to act almost without barriers, stay with me until the end. Because by understanding these two most intense levels of spiritual obsession, you'll realize that Emmanuel didn't bring these warnings to scare, but to open our eyes to the seriousness of mental and emotional life. After all, if in the second type, we already feel as if our own wills are being invaded, in the third, the sensation is of an almost total loss of autonomy. And recognizing these signs can be the difference between giving in to domination or regaining control of one's own existence. And it is precisely from this perspective that it becomes essential to reflect on the paths of protection and liberation that Emmanuel suggested. Because understanding the problem is only the first step. What follows will reveal how we can transform this reality. Have you ever stopped to think that many of the pains we carry could be alleviated if we learn to better manage our thoughts? How many times have you caught yourself harboring thoughts of fear, hurt, or discouragement without realizing that by doing so, you are opening the door to energies that don't help you at all? Emmanuel, the guiding spirit who accompanied Chico Xavier in so many messages of wisdom, left us precious guidance on how to deal with spiritual obsession and, most importantly, how to transform our lives through mental vigilance and attunement to goodness. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because more than warning about the dangers, Emmanuel showed us paths of liberation and light that remain relevant and necessary to this day. The first key Emmanuel gives us is simple, yet powerful. Watch your thoughts. It may seem obvious, but how often do we allow our minds to be taken over by painful memories, judgments, excessive worries, or resentments that only fuel the shadows around us? When he spoke about spiritual obsession, Emmanuel didn't just want us to identify negative influences, but to understand how much we ourselves participate in this synchronization. It's as if each thought were a seed. Whether we choose to plant seeds of anger, sadness, or envy, the fruits we reap could not be different. Have you ever felt like the more you focus on a problem, the heavier and more difficult everything seems to become? Because it is precisely at this point that spiritual obsession finds space to act. But Emmanuel doesn't leave us without a way out. On the contrary, he shows us that prayer is one of the most powerful resources for reversing this state. Not a mechanical prayer set out of obligation, but a heartfelt prayer. Born from the soul and connecting our hearts to higher forces, praying, according to Emmanuel, is not just asking for help, but also adjusting our inner frequency, tuning our mind to higher energies that strengthen us in the face of difficulties. And perhaps you've already experienced this, moments when, after a sincere prayer, you felt an unexpected peace, as if a weight had been lifted from your shoulders. In addition to vigilance and prayer, Emmanuel reinforces the importance of working for the good, said, that when we focus on helping, serving, and bringing light to others, we also end up healing our own wounds. Selfless work opens space for renewing energies to circulate in our lives. Think about how you feel when you extend a hand to someone, when you comfort someone in pain, or when you contribute, even in a small way, to brighten someone's day. It is in this movement that our vibration rises, closing the doors that were previously open to negative influences. Another fundamental point is connecting with good spiritual and human companions. Emmanuel reminded us that no one walks alone, and that our choices of friendship, social interactions, and even the content we consume daily shape the energetic environment in which we live. Surrounding yourself with elevated people and ideas is a form of natural protection, a barrier against denser vibrations. How many times have you noticed how a heavy environment can leave you exhausted, while a good conversation or a joyful encounter can completely renew your strength? This is the kind of connection we're talking about. The ability to consciously choose the energetic field in which we want to remain. Stay with me until the end, because understanding Emmanuel's teachings opens our eyes to a much broader reality. It's not about fearing spiritual obsession, but about seeing it as an invitation to awaken, a call to take the lead in our own spiritual lives. Emmanuel came not only to warn about the shadows, but to point out clear paths to the light, peace, and liberation that we can all achieve. And it is precisely from this perspective that we will delve even deeper into the teachings he left, understanding in a practical way how to apply this advice in our daily lives. Because if Emmanuel warned us about the dangers, he also showed us with the same clarity that there is a safe path to liberation, ... And do you know what makes this journey even more special? The fact that we're not alone in this process. Each of us brings unique experiences, different perceptions, and learnings that can enrich the journey of anyone seeking to better understand spirituality. So, if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what resonated most with you so far. It could be a personal experience, a reflection that came to mind while listening, or even a question that lingered. Your voice is an essential part of this dialogue, because when you share, others also recognize themselves in your story and realize they're not alone. And if this content has brought you some clarity, if it has somehow opened new horizons or awakened something within you, take the opportunity to like it. This simple gesture goes a long way in helping the message reach more people who may need just that word of comfort and enlightenment. It's like scattering little lights that together can illuminate paths that once seemed dark. And of course, if you feel like continuing to deepen this learning, or if you'd like to follow other messages and reflections inspired by Emmanuel's teachings and spiritual themes, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll ensure you'll always be there, following each new content, strengthening this community of people seeking growth, understanding, and transformation. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people, keeping alive the chain of light we're building together. So as we move forward on this journey, keep this invitation in your heart. Commenting, liking, and subscribing are not just digital interactions, but ways to nurture and expand a network of support and reflection that can transform lives. And it is precisely with this energy of unity and sharing that we continue to understand even more deeply the paths Emmanuel points out to us. ... Did you know that there are 3 different forms of spiritual obsession, and that we often suffer their effects without even realizing it? It seems distant, almost like an ancient story lost in the shadows of time. But the hidden truth is that this phenomenon is more present in our daily lives than we imagine. Emmanuel, Chico Xavier's guiding spirit, brought profound revelations on this topic, showing that it's not just a matter of belief or religious tradition, but rather a real impact on our inner journey, our mindset, and even our simplest decisions. What he explained remains relevant because it speaks directly to human dilemmas that span generations: anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, discouragement. Who hasn't felt this so intensely that it seemed to come from somewhere beyond themselves? Emmanuel was not just one spirit among many, but a voice that stood out for the clarity, moral authority, and depth of the messages he conveyed through Chico Xavier. His words were not meant to frighten or instill fear, but to enlighten, to show that behind every repetitive negative thought, every seemingly endless emotion, there may be a spiritual connection that needs to be understood. This perspective invites us to look at life more closely, to realize that we are not merely an isolated body or mind, but beings in constant connection with invisible energies and influences. And perhaps it is precisely this realization that explains why so many carry burdens that seem greater than they can bear. Spiritual obsession, according to Emmanuel, doesn't begin abruptly or spectacularly. It creeps in gradually, silently, taking advantage of small emotional and mental gaps. We open without realizing it. How many times have you caught yourself harboring thoughts of failure, harsh self-judgments, or seemingly endless resentments? These moments of fragility are like half-open doors, allowing external vibrations to find space to settle in. As if we were in a large radio station constantly transmitting and receiving signals. And depending on the frequency we choose, we attract spiritual companions who reinforce what we already carry within. This means that when we harbor heavy feelings, our attunement naturally connects with spirits that vibrate in the same frequency. It's not a punishment, but a law of affinity. Therefore, someone who lives immersed in fear tends to attract even more fear. Those who remain in anger attract presences that reinforce this state. This vicious cycle can become so intense that the person begins to feel they no longer have control over what they think or feel. Have you ever experienced this? You ever felt dominated by ideas that seem to be no longer part of you, but nevertheless insist on staying? This is one of the clearest signs that we are facing spiritual obsession in its different layers. Emmanuel emphasized that the key is not to fear this process, but to acknowledge it. When we understand how it works, we have the chance to break the cycle and transform our journey. And herein lies the beauty of his teachings. Far from bringing despair, they are an invitation to transformation, a call to take responsibility for what we feed in our minds and hearts. This is where spirituality meets practical life. Because we are not talking about something distant, but about situations we all experience to some degree. Just think of the times when a simple thought of gratitude or a gesture of kindness was able to change the course of your day. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because Emmanuel made it clear that it's not just about recognizing spiritual obsession, but about realizing how it shapes our reality when it goes unnoticed. Think about how many decisions have been made under the influence of negative emotions. How many opportunities have been foregone because of fears that seemed insurmountable? How many relationships have been strained by resentments that were nurtured day after day? Spiritual obsession manifests itself precisely in these behind-the-scenes situations, reinforcing patterns that imprison us and hinder our growth. It's as if we're being guided by an invisible hand, guiding us without our realizing it. And the great revelation is that this process isn't limited to the individual. It also affects communities, entire families, and groups that allow themselves to be swept away by waves of disharmony, intolerance, or hatred. When Emmanuel spoke about obsession, he wasn't limiting himself to the personal realm, but showed how it could expand collectively, creating dense spiritual environments that influence behavior on a large scale. That's why understanding this topic is so urgent. He's not just talking about you or me, but about society as a whole, how our internal choices can impact us far beyond what we imagine. By looking at this consciously, begin to understand that spiritual obsession is not an inevitable fate, but a process that can be interrupted with new mindset choices, with attitudes that raise our vibration and change our attunement. It's a liberating revelation to realize that the same mechanism that binds us can also be used to free us. Difference lies in what we choose to cultivate, in the type of energy we choose to nurture in our daily lives. And to make this content even more vivid, I invite you to leave a simple mark here in the comments. Right, I'm on this journey too. This phrase is more than just an interaction. It's a sign that you recognize the importance of looking within, of taking control of your own spiritual journey, and of sharing this quest with those also on this path. Have you ever stopped to consider that some of your quietest anxieties might not originate entirely within you? Perhaps that anxiety that arises out of nowhere, for no apparent reason, that persistent idea that won't leave your head, or even a sadness that suddenly appears like a shadow, may have a source that goes beyond what we can see with our eyes. Emmanuel, Chico Xavier's guiding spirit, left us profound teachings on what he called spiritual obsession. And among the forms he described, there is one that is so subtle and discreet that it often goes unnoticed by all of us. It is precisely this first type that deserves to be understood calmly, because it is into this that, without realizing it, many of us may be falling. This process begins in the invisible backstage of the mind, where thoughts repeat themselves. Like echoes we don't ask to hear, Emmanuel describes this initial influence as almost like a light breeze. It's not frightening, but insisting on always blowing in the same direction. Have you ever felt something similar, as if everything were fine? Around you, but inside you, a persistent restlessness began to take hold. It is at this point that the most discreet spiritual obsession acts, entering without fanfare, precisely because it seems part of our own mental flow. The hidden truth behind this is that often we are opening small spiritual breaches without realizing it. These gaps can arise from everyday decisions. A mindset laden with pessimism, pent-up resentments, or even moments when we neglect to monitor our thoughts. When we don't pay attention to the quality of what feeds our mind, it's as if we're leaving a window open on a cold night, allowing unwanted drafts to enter and change the temperature of our internal environment. Emmanuel warns that this type of obsession doesn't need major shocks to take hold. It infiltrates the details, the silence. The moment we become distracted from ourselves, consider, for example, a person who starts the day well, but as the hours go by, finds themselves overcome by thoughts of insecurity for no clear reason, or someone who carries a constant feeling that something bad is going to happen, even without any external evidence. These are small signs that can indicate this subtle influence, and it is precisely in this subtlety that danger lies, because the mind becomes accustomed to this noise and begins to consider it part of its own identity. At this point, the journey becomes even more delicate, because the person stops questioning whether it truly belongs to them. Transformation begins when we develop awareness of what's going on within us. Emmanuel doesn't bring this warning to generate fear, but rather to awaken lucidity within us. He shows us that if we learn to monitor our thoughts and emotions, we can identify when something isn't part of our essence. It's like learning to differentiate our own voice from a strange whisper trying to blend in with the same tone. This awareness can be a game changer, because it paves the way for more conscious decisions, allowing us to close these gaps before they become wide-open doors. The impact of this on our practical lives is profound. How often does a person dominated by fearful thoughts fail to take actions that could transform their destiny? How often do we sabotage our choices because of repetitive ideas that seem immutable? This type of obsession doesn't manifest itself in grandiose manifestations, but it silently alters the course of our journey. It's as if we were in control of a car, but someone, imperceptibly, began to tamper with the steering wheel, diverting us from the path we truly want to take. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding this first level is just the beginning. Emmanuel explains that as these influences gain ground, they can intensify, becoming increasingly direct. But before we get to that, it's crucial to emphasize this subtle influence is not a sentence. It's an invitation to vigilance, to a change of mindset, and to the search for balance. After all, every time we align ourselves with thoughts of peace, gratitude, and hope, we are, in practice, closing the doors to these invisible interferences. And it's at this point that I want to open up space for you to join in this reflection. When we talk about anxiety with no apparent cause, repetitive ideas, or feelings that seem to have no clear origin, you may have experienced something similar. Sharing these experiences can be liberating, and more than that, helps build a community of learning and support. So, if this content resonates with you, comment below. This resonates with me. Now, we continue together. Because the next step is to delve into how this process evolves and what happens when this spiritual influence stops being subtle and begins to become more intense. When we talk about the second type of obsession, we enter a more direct territory, where influence is no longer limited to subtle whispers in the mind or small emotional variations that seem to arise out of nowhere. Here we begin to notice behaviors that are at odds with the person's essence, attitudes that don't match their usual personality, and even sudden mood swings that have no logical explanation. Emmanuel describes this phase as a moment when the incarnate's mind no longer simply receives suggestions, but begins to react to them as if they were its own truths. It's as if the person starts wearing clothes that aren't theirs, but when looking in the mirror has difficulty noticing the difference. This second level of influence is more intense because, in addition to altering thoughts, it begins to affect concrete decisions, impacting relationships, professional choices, and even the way the individual sees themselves and the world, perhaps. You've witnessed something similar in someone close to you. A person who is always calm suddenly becomes irritable, impatient, or aggressive. Or, at the other extreme, someone who seemed full of vitality begins to display discouragement, a lack of interest in life, and a seemingly endless sense of emptiness. These changes don't arise out of nowhere, but they're also not explained solely by the external environment. Emmanuel shows us that, often, it's an influence that has already taken root more deeply, finding fertile ground in the spiritual and emotional breaches that were opened long ago. It's the most subtle level. This is the stage where the impact of the obsession begins to manifest itself more clearly and even become visible to others. If before it was merely an internal conflict, it now becomes part of the practical journey of everyday life. Imagine someone trying to maintain their routine, but feeling constantly pushed toward destructive thoughts, actions that don't align with their values, or disproportionate reactions to simple situations. It's at this point that many relationships begin to fray, and the person begins to miss important opportunities or even distance themselves from those who could help them. The hidden truth here is that the more one gives in to this process, the harder it becomes to distinguish what is genuinely ours from what comes from outside. And it is on this path of intensification that the third type of obsession emerges, considered by Emmanuel to be the most serious because it is no longer merely a matter of momentary suggestions or interference, but rather a kind of unhealthy partnership between the incarnate and the discarnate. In this phase, the obsessor finds such open space that it begins to act almost in concert with the person's mind and will, as if both were sharing the same internal space. It's as if someone were driving the car of your life alongside you. It's gradually taking the wheel, to the point where your hands remain in control only in appearance, while the actual steering wheel is no longer yours. This domination doesn't mean the person ceases to exist as an individual, but rather that their will becomes strongly conditioned by the will of another being. It's as if choices become increasingly less conscious, and behaviors reflect more the desires of the one being influenced than the true will of the one being influenced. Emmanuel explains that this process can lead to a state in which a person's very identity becomes obscured, plunging into actions they would never have taken under normal circumstances. Here, we're not talking about something spectacular or cinematic, but a silent and serious reality where the essence of the human being begins to be suffocated by an influence that has found space to take root. This is the most delicate stage, because it requires a profound transformation to be reversed. It's not enough to simply acknowledge strange thoughts or uncomfortable emotions. It's necessary to rebuild one's mindset, seek support, renew life decisions, and strengthen the connection with values that restore spiritual autonomy. Emmanuel shows that, even in this most severe state, nothing is lost, but the effort must be redoubled. The journey of liberation involves both the sufferer and those around them, because it is often through a support network, prayer, vigilance, and love that the process of regaining one's life becomes possible. It's important to understand that this third type doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of an accumulation of gaps that were opened but not closed, of influences accepted without question, until the inner space no longer offers resistance. This understanding is essential so that we don't approach the topic with fear, but with the awareness that every path can be transformed through clarity and the decision to change. Emmanuel always emphasized that the human mind is a powerful force and that, even in the face of the deepest shadows, the light of a new choice can completely reshape the backstage of life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because, in understanding the gravity of this process, we also need to understand the mechanisms of liberation and how it is possible to regain control of the car of life when we feel we are no longer alone at the wheel. This delve opens the door to transformative revelations, which show not only the risk of obsession, but also the power of awakened awareness and renewed will right there. I'm on this journey too. Have you ever noticed how small, seemingly, harmless mental habits can shape the entire trajectory of our lives? Emmanuel, the guiding spirit who accompanied Chico Xavier through so many profound revelations, teaches us that true transformation begins within us, in how we manage our thoughts, emotions, and the decisions we make daily. It's not just about avoiding external influences, but about taking responsibility for our own mindset and the quality of what we allow into our consciousness. This is where many people are surprised. What seems like a daily worry, passing anxiety, or even a persistent sadness often has deeper roots than we imagine. In the subtle layers of our mind and in influences we cannot see with the naked eye, mindfulness of thoughts is one of Emmanuel's central teachings. He reminds us that the mind functions like fertile ground. What we cultivate grows and manifests itself in our choices, behaviors, and attitudes. Repetitive thoughts of fear, anger, or discouragement can open invisible gaps, allowing energies or influences that do not serve us to find space to act. On the other hand, when we cultivate attention, self-awareness, and habits of reflection, we begin to plant seeds that bear fruits of peace, clarity, and balance. It is a journey of constant observation, an invitation to notice each impulse, each emotion that arises, and ask, does this truly belong to me? Or am I being guided by something I don't recognize as mine? The answer to this question is fundamental to reorienting our trajectory and regaining control over our lives. Another essential point Emmanuel emphasizes is prayer, but not in the mechanical or ritualistic sense. True prayer, according to him, is a tool for internal alignment, a practice that connects our consciousness with higher energies, with forces that strengthen us and help us make more conscious decisions. It is through prayer that we find calm in the face of a whirlwind of thoughts, courage to face challenges, and clarity to see hidden truths that are not always visible. Prayer creates a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds, allowing us to act in a more centered and harmonious way. Even when life's behind the scenes seems full of invisible interference, working for the good is another principle that Emmanuel emphasizes as transformative. Acting altruistically, helping others, offering attention, affection, or any gesture of solidarity, however simple, has a profound impact on our own lives. Each act of kindness is like a light shining on the path, illuminating not only the recipient, but also the giver. And the effect is twofold. While we increase our own attunement to positive energies, we also create an internal environment more resistant to negative influences. It's a form of spiritual self-defense that simultaneously promotes personal growth and contributes to collective transformation, connecting with good. Spiritual and human companions complements this journey. Emmanuel warns us that no one walks alone, and that our choices regarding social interactions, friendships, mentors, and even the content we consume shape the energy that permeates our daily lives. Being close to people who uplift, inspire, and share positive values is essential to keeping a clear mind, a light heart, and a life aligned with nobler goals. On the other hand, environments filled with negativity or toxic relationships can reinforce thoughts and emotions that take us away from balance. creating a cycle that is difficult to break without awareness and effort. What Emmanuel comfortingly conveys to us is that these practices, monitoring our thoughts, praying, working for the good, and choosing good company, are not just preventative strategies against obsession or negative influence, but invitations to awaken our consciousness. He doesn't warn us to generate fear, but to offer tools for liberation and show that, even in the face of the most subtle shadows, there is always an opportunity to regain our autonomy. Every reflection, every small conscious decision, every act of kindness are steps that lead us to a clearer, fuller, and more transformative life. If Emmanuel warned us about the existence of these influences and the risks of allowing uncontrolled thoughts and emotions to take over, he also showed us, with equal clarity, the path to light and liberation. It is a journey of self-discovery, where each conscious choice becomes a bridge to greater inner freedom. Understanding these hidden truths, realizing the impact of small daily decisions, and taking responsibility for one's own mindset is, in itself, an act of courage and profound transformation. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the general principles is just the beginning. We need to look at the details, the nuances of how these influences manifest in thoughts and emotions, and also the mechanisms that allow us to regain control of our lives in a practical and consistent way. It is at this level that consciousness truly expands, allowing a person to perceive not only the external signals, but also the internal movements that shape their spiritual, emotional, and mental journey. If you feel like these ideas resonate with you, comment below. This makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, you've already realized how these reflections on spiritual obsession and Emmanuel's teachings can bring clarity and new perspectives to life. And that's precisely why it makes sense to subscribe to the channel. The idea here is to bring content that helps you better understand the mind, emotions, and the spiritual journey, always with practical explanations connected to real life, so you can apply these lessons in your daily life. Subscribing is just one way to ensure you continue following this type of content that truly adds value to your journey. And if you felt this video brought something meaningful, leave a comment indicating you made it to the end. It could be a simple phrase like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." Seeing these comments helps me realize we're building a real connection, that the content is truly reaching people who are seeking to better understand these profound issues also. Take the opportunity to leave a like, naturally, as a sign that this conversation was helpful to you. Each like isn't just a number. It's a way of reinforcing that we're all in this together in this quest for knowledge, understanding, and growth. It helps strengthen this community of reflection and transforms each video into an even richer space for those who want to learn and be inspired. And if you want to continue this journey, there's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow along. There we'll dive even deeper into details and reflections that expand on what we just discussed. It's an opportunity to take this learning to a deeper level, with even more clarity and insights that can make a difference in your daily life. So, comment below. I'm with you until the end. Leave your like and move on to the next video, because there's a lot of valuable stuff waiting for you right there.